welcome to another edition of Reframe the Future, a series in which we discuss the future trends and directions of travel for our industry and how, with the help of leading changemakers, we might make the biggest impact. And today, joining Joe and I, and on the subject of making an impact in our industry, we have Jill Piercy, Director of Reputation at the ABPI. Jill, welcome to Reframe the Future.
Thanks very much, Chris. Bit of background about me. I've been at the ABPI for nearly 6 years now, and my role as Director of Reputation is things to do with enhancing the reputation of industry and work streams around basically our societal license to operate, things like diversity, ethics, sustainability.
On that topic of reputation and thinking about the things that we need to be considerate of, particularly in today's modern society, today we're going to be talking about misinformation and how building industry-wide trust in the pharmaceutical industry is key to breaking down the barriers many still have when engaging with health information. A recent study by the World Economic Forum stated that only 40% of people say they consistently trust news, and disinformation is considered to be the world's top risk in the next 2 years. Polarized leadership and new technologies placing us in the heart of a post-truth era, and its damaging effects have wide-ranging implications in healthcare. And it's probably not a controversial thing to say that the pharmaceutical industry itself has had a bit of a problem with trust. So, to kick things off, how is the pharmaceutical industry perceived at the minute?
It's a mixed picture. There are plenty of positives. For example, we found that around 76% of people really think that the industry makes good products and that these are products that people need. Collaborations as well are well regarded. 4 out of 5 people think the sector should be free to build really effective collaborations with the NHS that help patients. Globally, other surveys that we haven't done, but global surveys have found that the sector is viewed as one of the most highly regarded in terms of being good at what it does compared to other industries. So there's all really good signs. But it's not job done by any means. We found that familiarity is actually quite limited. And in our surveys, that's been around 21% of the general public.
Yeah, I mean, it's great to see the good work that we're doing kind of being seen more, maybe trusted more by the general public. I think that's really important. Familiarity is an interesting term, and I know that's something that you guys have been looking at very specifically. Do you think the impact of familiarity is having has an impact on poorer reputation and as an industry because they just don't know who we are and what we do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, familiarity is the bedrock of trust. So it's one of the key drivers in reputation. And it does have an impact on, our ability to make good collaborations. If people don't trust us, if they're not familiar with that, they're less likely to participate in vital research. So there's a health issue there as well as an innovation issue. If healthcare professionals or patient organizations have uncertainties around us, they're less likely to take part fully in the kind of partnerships that we think that drive forward health. And another aspect is, getting people to join the industry in terms of careers. If people from diverse groups, we need all the talent that we can get. It's a huge and growing industry and they're fantastic jobs. But if people don't understand that this is a place for them, or they're unaware of the benefits in terms of the kind of careers that they could have, they'd be less likely to join us, and that would be a real loss. We saw during the pandemic there was a lot of positive awareness around the industry's willingness to collaborate. So there's been some good things. There's been some good improvements there. It is possible to make a difference in this, when we were more out there under the spotlight, certainly there was a view that we were making a difference in terms of the health benefit for the country.
Yeah, I mean, the pandemic was, daily on the briefings, our industry was there at the forefront and being talked about. And it definitely feels like that kind of awareness and that trust of us as an industry is continuing somewhat. And I guess, over the last 3 years, is that why the ABPI has commissioned this research into reputation and what the perceptions of our industry is like? And it would be interesting to just hear a bit more about kind of what you're doing and why you're doing it in that area.
Yes, we've been running this research for a few years now. Building a stronger reputation for the industry is my job. It's it's a key enabler of our overall business strategy in terms of making the UK a really great place to develop and to use and to make the medicines of the future. So understanding where we are is really important so that we can work out whether or not we're making any progress. We have to do that sort of tracking.
You know, your research, and you mentioned you've been running it, I think it's for 3 years now. I think I'd like to move things on a little bit, maybe just to think about some of the trends that you've noticed over the last couple of years. You mentioned the pandemic, so obviously that was a big boost for the general awareness of our industry and everything that we do. But it's interesting to see how things might have developed and changed in such what is a relatively short space of time. Does it feel like our sector can do more now to build interest and familiarity? And what more do you think we can do to improve that overall trust and familiarity in our industry?
Yes, I mean, we absolutely can do more. We certainly did have that sort of bump up in terms of a number of our indicators. Familiarity was relatively stable, but in terms of favourability and advocacy and trust, they all sort of went up a bit, particularly around when the vaccines came in for COVID. So that does show that if we're out there, as you say, if we're front of mind, we can make that difference. But there are some trends that have persisted over time. And I'd like to sort of mention a couple of our other surveys. As I said, we do some work with clinicians as well as with the general public. And what we've found is that those relationships between clinicians and the industry are really valued. People who have those kind of interactions have a very positive impression of them. And 1 in 5 people would say that those interactions are actually essential for their roles. So there's a really good, solid foundation of positive sentiment around the relationship between industry and HCP as healthcare professionals. I think that we've made a good start. We have some good relationships and we're going to build on those. And I think we have to be quite confident and positive in terms of talking about what the industry can do and what the positive benefits for patients are. I mean, there've been some fantastic innovations, even, the last few days. Every day you see something coming out that really does make a difference for patients. People feel that we are trustworthy enough to listen to what those benefit stories are. I'd say that, sometimes we're a bit inclined not to raise our voices, and it can be true that sometimes people do criticize us or react negatively, but we have to be confident, and we do know that when familiarity improves, trust improves as well. So we should get out there and talk about our purpose, and we shouldn't risk leaving an information vacuum so that people can, create the policies that don't fit with what the real life situation is. We have to really stand up there and talk about what matters to us and why it's making a difference for patients. So I think being proactive is really, really important. We're working on some more proactive communications at the ABPI, and we want to focus on that, building that awareness of our shared purpose. We have common goals with patients, with healthcare professionals, with government in terms of improving health. So we really want to communicate that and get that across, and not to be left with anything that looks at all adversarial.
Yeah, and as communicators, we know the power of being proactive with communications, not always on the back foot and reacting to stuff, having the confidence and the understanding that we can be, forward thinking in the way we're communicating. The industry does a lot of great stuff and we should be able to champion that. I think there can be worries or concerns within this industry about what we can or can't do, but there's a lot we can do within the bounds of the code, and we should be able to talk openly about those, and that's where that transparency, that familiarity, that trust comes from, and so it's really heartening to see that the ABPI is taking that more proactive approach to communications and really elevating the voice of our industry, which is really fantastic. And just to bring it back quickly to the research again, I think there was a couple of really important focus points of that research, looking at the idea of character and capability. And I wondered if you could just tell us a bit more about those, because they're very specific words and specific directions. So it'd be good to know a bit more about that.
Sure. I mean, both are a good opinion on both is really important. The capability is where we score very highly, and it tends to be people recognizing our strength in creating good products that work. We get the right medicines, we innovate, we have vaccines that work. The the actual things that there's a lot of trust for the products themselves that people are recommended to take, but character is a slightly different thing. It's about this societal license to operate. It's the question about the way that industry is perceived to behave, the way that we work with people, the attitudes, the ethics, and it's vital that that our patients and partners understand the ethical principles underlying what we do, and there's kind of that these are seen in action. It's not just the words, that they actually experience these in the way that we approach topics like diversity, sustainability, transparency is something that comes up a lot. So if people see and understand and are aware of what we're doing in these areas, that makes a huge difference in terms of understanding around our character, and then that will drive into reputation. It's not just enough to be good at what you're doing, you have to be seen to be good in the way that you're doing it, so to win trust and to improve reputation.
This feels like a really critical point actually for me, Jill. We've seen some latest research that says I think it's nearly around 3/4 of healthcare professionals expect more from the industry in terms of kind of societal and humanitarian impact, going outside of what we do and how we do it, and looking at that sustainability, business ethics, all of those really important values that you've just talked about. And I guess a question would be where you think this lack of character and kind of familiarity originates from. Are there certain channels through which this perception spreads?
Yeah, I think it's a sort of multiple issues here. I mean, one of them is that obviously we don't market directly to consumers, to patients, and there's certainly no desire to start doing that. But that does mean that we don't have so much in the way of proactive communication channels already created to patients, and there's a lot of restrictions, as you know. There's a lot of guardrails around any communication that takes place to patients, but that means that in the absence of real knowledge about the sector, sometimes people can assume that the focus of the industry is on profits rather than patients, and they don't actually go and look for evidence around sustainability or transparency and so on. I think there's definitely quite a lack of understanding in the general public around the restrictions that are placed on companies in terms of how they can communicate. So when people don't hear something, there's a tendency to assume the worst and to assume that there must be something uneasy going on. There's a lack of certainty that no knowledge, no information doesn't mean that it's going to be good stuff going on. So that's part of it, is that we're just not out there so much. And as I mentioned, we do tend to be quite risk averse in our communications. So we shut ourselves down a little bit. Perhaps we need to be a bit more confident about going out there and stepping up. I think the way that we talk as an industry can be a factor as well. We tend to use objective, evidence-based language. We're a science-based industry, which is fine, but that's not necessarily going to engage people emotionally. And we know that people are likely to look at lots of different channels when they're going to seek information. They won't just come to an industry website or the NHS website or whatever. They might use lots of different social channels or speak to family and friends and so on. So if people are taking information about medicines, about the industry from a wide variety of sources, perhaps we're just not getting the cut through because of the way that we communicate.
It's interesting, Jill. And it kind of comes down to a really big kind of subject that I think I opened up with this morning, and you hit on here that we should be very proud about the way that we communicate, right? It is evidence-based, it is backed with science and rigor, and we have lots of very smart people in our industry, which is a bit of an undersell, really, saying, producing these fantastic innovations. But when we don't communicate, there becomes that vacuum. And what happens in the vacuum is people make their own minds up. So I'd like to just kind of flip it a little bit, actually, and start thinking about misinformation, because as we start to think about, the information that we produce is tried and trusted, it is evidenced, but we need to become accustomed to this idea that people will believe what they read and more, this post-truth era we find ourselves in is a genuine and legitimate threat to reputation and trust. And in our sector, it plays with our lives. So to what extent do you think misinformation plays a part? And what more can the ABPI and its members be doing to tackle this issue around transparency and trust?
Well, as you say, misinformation is a huge worry in all sectors, and it's on the rise, whether that's inadvertent or deliberately by bad actors. And it's certainly true that it's a material threat to reputation and to trustworthiness. Whether it's, I think people are to some extent aware when they've seen it. So how damaging it is at the moment, I don't know, but it's certainly something that is increasing, and it can take hold very quickly. It can lead to lasting reputational damage. And so we need to be able to act fast and to act appropriately to counter it. And I think what we need to do at the ABPI is to help industry engage responsibly with patients, with the public, with clinicians, make sure that we have the right frameworks that actually support companies in communicating through lots of different channels, guidance and on social media, for example. And as an industry, really need to work hard to make sure that what we're saying is clear and it's relevant for people, and that we're going to people in the places where they're having these conversations. So I don't think there's anything totally mystical, but we need to make sure we've got the tools in terms of the frameworks, the skills, and the language that's actually going to counter it, and just keep on top of it all the time.
And do you think there's any sort of collaborations and kind of engagements, partnerships that are going to be help bridge that gap or close that gap quicker or better or more efficiently? Is there any specific partnerships or collaborations you think are going to really help here?
Yes, I think working with patient organisations is really important here. I mean, they're at the sharp end, so they're hearing a lot of this, and they have a lot of patients coming to them with queries or questions or worries all the time. So the more that we can work with patient organisations and to define what's needed in terms of information and communications, the better, I think. We also need to work with expert groups, learning societies, or regulators or so on, to make sure that we have those guardrails and frameworks that are actually suitable for the information world that we find ourselves in now, that we're not trying to tackle this with outdated approaches. That's really important, and it's vital to continue to sort of grow the ability of industry to tackle misinformation. But I think it's definitely not something we can do alone. The role of regulation and the way that we evolve our code and frameworks is really important as well.
I think you hit on in the previous answer there around pace. We have to become a little bit more accustomed to a pace of communication that might be unfamiliar to ourselves from even just a couple of years ago. I think one of the biggest reasons why misinformation spreads is because it takes off. It takes off in an instant across the channels that we're now communicating through, and it can take weeks and weeks for us to produce sensible plans around some of the information that might be put out there. But I'm really kind of I cherish the kind of news that we see in our channels now. You mentioned every day at the moment we seems to be seeing a new genetic screening test for this disease, or a new access to gene therapy to treat another disease. And those good news stories, we have to hope those good news stories and the partnerships that sit behind them will shine and will take precedent on the media and the news and the social channels that everybody uses. Even some of the younger generations, they come through, as you said. But it's no small task, right? Building these collaborations and partnerships to generate that genuine authenticity and trust. But we have to get behind that. So if we're thinking ourselves more proactively now, let's think ourselves in a bit of a solutions mindset. Imagine yourself in 12 months' time. You've repeated this research. What do you think the biggest changes are likely to be? And what are the biggest changes that you would like to see?
Well, I hope we see some signs of change, of more positive, more familiarity, a more positive approach. But it's something that takes time, so it's not going to happen overnight. But I like to see that we have some green shoots, as it were, there. I'd like to be able to point to some best practice, so maybe some anecdotal examples where things are being done differently. so that we can talk more about where we're making a difference for patients and actually having that come across in the right way. I mean, I know that there are so many sort of really committed, really purpose-driven people in the industry who want to make a difference, and just getting those stories told more effectively is something that we all need to do. And it really matters to just keep on putting our heads above the parapet and keep on being confident and to make the case. So in research we may see a bit, we'll be tracking it for sure and seeing what difference it makes, but I'd like to see just the case study examples as well coming up that really sort of change the flavour of the atmosphere of around the industry and the culture that we're perceived to have.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think, we know with the work we do, with the clients we work with that of our peers and our kind of competitor agencies, should we say, we're all there to do a good job. We want to ultimately better the lives of people that need our medications. And being able to tell those stories is absolutely crucial. We've just launched a campaign called Cancer Equals, which is focused on health inequalities within cancer, and the outpouring of response from the community, from those with cancer, from healthcare professionals, has been nothing but incredible. And it just shows that when we do stick our head above the parapet, as you say, and vocalize what the industry can do and does do, there's nothing really but good response to that. And I think that's really, really crucial. So I guess for me, what would be your kind of main message or call to action to say, the key audiences that we operate with, the policymakers, the healthcare professionals, patients, general public, what would you say is the call to action to help build kind of the industry's role and trust with all of these groups?
I would say help us to be transparent and to communicate with impact, and work with us, really work with us. We all need to work together to share best practice, and come into these conversations about whether we have the right governance structures, whether we have the right habits and perceptions. Are these limiting the way that we can make a difference for public health? How can we work better and help patients and see that perceived in a different way? I think the question is to work together and be innovative as innovative in our communications as we are in the way that we develop medicines. And this can only happen in partnership with the whole life sciences ecosystem. It's not an individual thing for the industry. We have to be part of it together.
Completely agree that it is going to be a complex kind of set of moves that we need to make to build familiarity and trust. But today has been such an incredibly valuable conversation. Just to round up, really, a few reflections from us. We've learned how collaborations today are potentially not strong enough to meet the demands of tomorrow's healthcare consumer, and how we need to be as innovative with our communications as we are in developing new products. We've learned that reputation and trust is fragile, and today's rise of misinformation is forcing us all to think about how we might be better safeguarding the truth. And we've learned that to do that is going to take time, and we'll need investment in long-term partnerships. Something our industry, as you've heard today, is fully committed and wants to get behind. So Jill, thank you very much for joining us on Reframe the Future.
Yeah, thank you, Jill. Really enjoyed our chat.
Thanks very much. Pleasure being here.